Kastur Gandhi lived almost her entire life in what to a casual observer might look like the stifling and gigantic shadow of her husband, Mohandas Gandhi. While some of that is indeed true, what is not known by the world is that throughout their 62 years of marriage, Kastur was a decisive, if subtle, behind the scenes force that Gandhi turned to frequently. Theirs was a uniquely complex relationship between a man who often yearned for highly educated, intellectual women and in fact struck relationships with, and a woman extraordinarily self assured that her man would inevitably depend on her. Tushar Gandhi, a writer and peace activist, is about to publish a book based on Kasturba's rather austere writings to drive home the point that she was his guiding light. In a candid interview with Mayank Chhaya Reports, Tushar talks about the extraordinary relationship between his great grandparents, Kastur and Mohandas. Today is just the day after the 78th death anniversary of Kasturba. I'm
Mhm.
curious to understand how she has been viewed within the extended Gandhi clan over the decades.
Unfortunately, she was too close to a very huge personality, and so it was very natural that she sort of became invisible to everyone. It's like, if you can say, a planet next to the sun. And,
Yes.
you don't notice it, but it's there. It's there and has a vital role to play. And for those who were close and for those who looked from afar, it had the same effect. So Ba gradually became invisible till she almost merged into that persona of the Mahatma. But I think, and I'm very convinced about the fact that the persona of the Mahatma, which we have attributed to the individual, actually belongs to the couple, because without the other partner, the individual would not have been able to create that kind of a larger than life identity.
That's an very interesting construct. In a sense, I mean, from what I've read and what I've heard from you on your various podcasts, etc., it almost seems as if Mohandas Bhai fed off Kasturba to a significant extent.
Yes, initially, yes, because she was his sounding board. She was his support in his formative years, and she was his anchor also when he was uh, like a sailboat with a tempest in its sail. You know,
Yeah.
it could have been, it could have gone berserk, it could have floundered, but Ba was the rudder that kept guiding it to the onto the path in the formative years. And I think even Bapu never ever forgot that contribution of Ba. Ba was thus such that she allowed herself to be taken for granted also in that traditional role of the first the daughter of the family, then the daughter-in-law of the family, then the wife in a relationship, and then the mother of the family.
Yeah.
What happened with her was that the transition from being mother of her family, she suddenly had to transit into a role of mother of an ever expanding family where the blood relationships didn't count for anything.
Right. Right. Even without being privy to the personal equation, it would seem logical that theirs could not have been an easy relationship as husband and wife for several reasons. One of which was that they were spoken for since the age of 6 or so, right? And
Yes.
what's your view of the Mohandas Kastur relationship from a considerable historic distance now?
Well, I think it's one of the most unique of relationships because at an age where you know being in a relationship would have not meant anything. It would have just meant we have a permanent toy to play with, kind of,
Right,
at the initial stage, to getting married when marriage was a strange thing. Although 13 in those times was maybe like early 20s in these times. But even then, it was pretty soon to get married, and that is where Bapu's whole principle against child marriages, his stand against child marriages, evolved from that because before Kasturba, he had lost three partners to even before getting married to them. He was just betrothed to thrice,
right.
and the partners died before they could get married. So Kasturba was the fourth choice as to if there was a choice there,
Yes,
because it was the families who had decided the whole thing, and then the transitions through which they lived was made their relationships even unique. And from Kasturba's point of view, the transitions were so dramatic and so stress filled
yes,
because she was married to a man who continuously kept changing at very short intervals in life.
right,
We sort of take it for granted that you are one in the youth, and then in the young ages you change slightly, then in the early middle ages you change further, then, when you are in the middle age period, there is a change, and then when you go into the senior age group, there is a change. So there are stages at which changes are expected of one generally. Over here, there was a person who was defying all those age-specific changes, who was changing constantly as he was growing. He was changing, and the changes were so dramatic that I'm sure they must have caused trauma to the people who were very, very close to him, in his immediate vicinity. And
right.
Ma was the most permanent person in that close group of people, and so she must have faced a lot of trauma, a lot of anxiety while those changes were happening. And I think it must have been only a belief in that man which helped her to survive all those dramatic changes in her partner's life. And it was almost as if at regular intervals she was being forced to live in a relationship with a complete stranger.
Yeah, absolutely. I was about to say that. It's you marrying a different man every few years.
Yes, yes. And yet you had to find the boy you married when you were 13 in that continuously changing human.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I was about to ask you whether in her mind, of course this is speculative, but do you think in her mind she always remembered the fact that they were together from childhood and she might have seen him, indulged him, tolerated him, humored him from that perspective?
I think the one who lived in her heart was Monio.
Huh,
Monio lived eternally in her heart. And then, of course, when passion was dominant in their relationship, the
right,
passionate Mohandas
right,
must have also lived in her heart, because they that was one of the most fruitful period of their relationship, when they created a family of their own. And so
right.
those two images she must have kept closed in her heart, because you must also remember that it was only those two identities which she did not have to share with
Right.
the world. After that, she had to continuously share the new man who came into her life. Uh,
Yeah.
in South Africa, in the first half of their stay in South Africa, the barrister who came back from England was a family property. South Africa, he was becoming successful, but he was becoming a public persona.
Right.
Then, towards the end of South Africa, was a complete public persona.
Right.
And then back in India, she completely lost him.
Yeah.
Because back in India, the Mahatma
Yeah.
bloomed, and then there was no personal tie. So the two initial identities were the only two identities which were exclusively hers.
Right. Right. That's
And they have
fascinating.
they must have provided a huge comfort to her
Right. Right.
while she saw him being stolen from her almost.
Right.
She must have smiled and said, "No, there is that captive in my heart you will never be able to steal from me."
True. You know, Gandhi's life was marked by what I call unconscious self absorption and self centeredness. It wasn't malicious, but the way he operated on the scale that he operated on, there was an absolute self belief that propelled him. Within that thinking, where do you think Kasturba fitted?
I think when he evolved to that level, he subconsciously, and in his role as a husband, he took Kasturba for granted, but he also realized that the persona that he was becoming, Kasturba was an indivisible component of that persona. Because if you look at the last 4 years of his life when he had lost Ba, you can decipher how lost he felt, how
Right.
lonely he felt, how incomplete he felt in that period. If you read his writings, if you read his correspondence, hardly ever, I think he must have mentioned Ba more in the last 4 years of his life when she was no longer with him than in the first 56 years of their relationship together.
Then what this means is the early years from the age of 6 onwards to the time 13, 14, 15, and then the last 4 years of his life. I think Mohandas Bhai recognized the true value of who she was towards the end of his own life, right? Is that a right perspective to have?
No, I think he knew always who she was and what she meant to him. But her loss, the physical loss of her,
Right,
and you must remember the physical loss had happened when they vowed to be brahmacharis.
right.
The physical relationship ended, but they created a even more intimate spiritual relationship after that. When the
Yeah,
physicality had ended, they became the mates of a spirit together.
yeah,
But so he was the pining was not for the physical comfort; it was the comfort of her soul. And you see, when you see the two photographs of him grieving over Ba's body at Aga Khan Palace detention, they speak volumes about what she meant to him.
right.
In that one photograph where he's sitting in a corner and you see Ba's mortal remains in the room, you see just the top of Ba's head, and you see in the distance Bapu sitting. His whole body language, the expressions on his face are completely better, grief stricken, lost, and
Right.
sort of, kind of perplexed by what will happen to me now, kind of thing. That particular photograph speaks volumes about their relationship and the depth of their relationship.
Right. You mentioned brahmacharya or celibacy. My perhaps, again, speculative sense is that it was a Hobson's choice for Kasturba. I mean, she may have gone along with it, but it essentially came down from Mohandas Bhai, and she sort of said, "All right. I mean, if that's what you want." Do you think they agreed together, or she
No.
had some misgivings about it?
In that period of his life, there was no agreement together. It was things that he discovered and decided for himself.
There you
And
go.
you must also remember one thing, that the the time period when this happened, culturally, the husband always took decisions. Which husband went and asked the wife's permission or anything? The husbands who went and asked their wives for permissions to do things and things, you know what they were called.
Yeah,
So it was the wife also never expected the husband. I'm sure if Bapu had gone and asked Kasturba what she thought of his decision to take become brahmacharya, or said, let's have a conversation about brahmacharya, Ba
yeah,
would have said, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in that. You must
yeah,
also remember the physical aspect of a relationship would have become an anxiety for Ba by that time. Five deliveries,
yeah.
two very difficult traumatic deliveries. The last two were. So there would have been an association of dread with the act of sex.
Right.
So for Ba, uh, his declaration that he was going to become celibate after that would have come with a great sense of relief also.
That's interesting.
We must remember all those factors when we tried to analyze that relationship from the modern point of view. Today's perspective, and in relationships, sex has become a very important thing.
Yeah.
That wasn't so in those times. We must remember that.
Right.
And for most of the women, it was a huge big bother. You come back, they've slogged the whole day, finished all their chores, prepared for tomorrow's chores, and then the only thing they want to come and crash in their
Yeah.
bed, and suddenly their husband is filled with lust and on top of them
Right.
another torture kind of thing more than pleasure. uh,
Absolutely.
so we must also recognize that when for Bapu it was a big decision. He was a man, he was a male.
Yeah.
For him it was a big decision. For Ba it would have come as a relief.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm glad you're saying that because that was my thought as well. That finally I'm relieved.
Yes.
We have done enough.
The next thing she would have thought is that before, when he finally succeeded in practicing celibacy after the Zulu rebellion, the
Right.
Zulu uprising, uh, he had taken vows of celibacy and told Ba that, I'm going to be celibate and we must not have relationships. And on many occasions, he writes himself that I was not able to resist the temptation and I broke it.
Right.
So Ba also would have thought, oh yes, okay, fine, we'll see how it is. You've come back to me many times before this, so let's see, let's wait and watch. It's like the husband promising his wife every anniversary that I'm quit smoking, and
Yeah.
then it starts off all over again. So it would have maybe 6 months, a year after that decision was conveyed to her, would she have started believing in it.
Yeah. To change gears a bit, do you think Mohandas Bhai considered Kasturba as her intellectual equal or intellectually compatible?
That was one of his regrets, where because he had also started equating intellectual ability with educational qualifications. in his own way, and that is where the his whole life, the one thing that he never was successful in doing was educating Ba. He kept striving for that, and that is where his, into inverted commas, attraction for intellectually stimulating women
Right.
came about, because that was one aspect that he kept feeling Ba lacked. But when it came to a crisis situation, he turned to the earthy and a very word-wise intellect of Ba for solutions. He relied on her for that,
Right.
for her advice, for her analysis. When he required a solution to it, it was Ba who provided it for him.
Right.
But yes, he did not. That was one of the regrets and one of the things that he found lacking in his relationship with Ba. But I think it was from the point of view of his being exposed to educated, opinionated, westernized women.
Right. Right. But again, that leads me to my next question. I read in a few places that Mohandas Bhai could be dismissive of Kasturba on occasion because he, like you mentioned, he did not see her as his intellectual equal. Is that your sense too?
Yes, and I think he also was, he had a phenomenal grasp of things. And Kasturba would have been found lacking in that kind of ability. Maybe.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe. But so, in the speedy, if you were going to do a rapid question round with me, maybe I'll flounder. Maybe
Okay.
that was that is when he was also dismissive of Ba, because Ba had a very kind of a very basic method of communication. If you even I've just deciphered her diary,
Yeah.
and if
I.
you read her diary, the pages of her diary, you realize that she used the barest minimum number of required words to express herself.
Right.
When she wanted to write, I had coffee after getting up, you'll find just the word got up, coffee,
I
prayer.
see. I see.
And that sums up the first act of her morning. And something like, I gargled.
Right.
She'll just say kogra
Okay.
in Gujarati. And
Bilkul.
so maybe her speaking style was also that frugal. If you remember the old ladies of our childhood, well,
I do.
they would speak in monosyllables.
Right.
And we understood what they wanted to say. But maybe at one point of time it felt irritating also, because when you ask them, "Aaj bhel khaishu?" or "Will we have a pizza today?"
Yeah.
And they say, "Okay."
Uh,
Hey, what do you mean? Okay, can't you tell me which pizza you want, or whether it's a good idea or bad idea? That was the kind of irritation or dismissiveness that Bapu might have felt by this woman with whom he expected to have conversations, responding in brief sentences, few words, taking her time to finish the conversation and things. So, and Bapu, you must remember, was in a hurry. He had so much to do. He was dealing with so many things all the time, issues of the ashram, issues of the ashram inmates, issues of the Congress, issues of the Satyagraha, issues of his social reform movements. All of those things were packed into his 24 hours.
right.
So it would have been very difficult for him to have an hour long discussion with his wife or conversation with his wife, who was just responding to him in monosyllables.
But you can flip that to say that someone who was as hyper voluble and as hyper articulate as Mohandas Bhai, may have found some solace in the fact that he had an austerely expressive wife.
He did, absolutely he did. Because
Yeah,
even though he dismissed her often, it never happened that he did not bounce his next idea off her first before it with anybody else. So
right,
he knew that maybe she may not come up with something brilliant as a response immediately, but maybe if I bounce the idea of her, she's going to absorb it and then come up with some new thing that I might have omitted later on.
right.
And he valued that. He did
Yeah,
value that immensely.
right. Just last couple of things, Tushar. One is you mentioned the fact that Gandhi did gravitate towards sort of opinionated, traditionally, not traditionally, in a sense, people who were educated in a formal sense, who were sharply intelligent. He gravitated towards those women. So my question is whether how do you think Kasturba would have responded to the presence of many swooning female disciples that Gandhi seemed to have?
Initially, she was disturbed by it. When she was at a vulnerable stage in her life, she was disturbed by it. Initially, her relationship with Millie Pollock in South Africa was very
Right,
hostile. But while there was that suspicion and fear of those women, there was immense trust in her husband also, that this guy, no matter what, he's going to come back to me. He's never going to make the other woman a part of his life, kind of thing. And as they grew up in the later stage, when the fawning and the groupie community kind of thing, entourage grew, I think she was at peace with her place in his heart. She was completely assured. And that is where even the chapter with Sarlaben,
right,
where the whole ashram was anxious about whether Bapu would, opt out and for Sarlaben.
right.
Ba was the only one who said, no, 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 this is a passing phase. It
I see.
happens. I'm not bothered about it. She was the calmest of the lot. If you read the period of the relationship with Sarlaben,
Right,
everybody else was complaining about it, commenting about it. Even Siraj Gopalachari tried to intervene in that. And when Siraj Gopalachari tried to recruit Ba to bring an end to that madness that even Bapu admitted he had for Sarlaben. I said, "Don't worry, it'll pass. I'm not bothered about it. Don't
right,
worry."
right,
It wasn't that it didn't matter to her. It mattered a great deal, but she had that implicit faith in her husband that he will not break their relationship. He will not go out of that relationship. He will not make that relationship subserving one to another one.
right.
She had total faith in that fidelity of her husband.
Yeah. Kasturba obviously came from a very wealthy family. You
Yes.
pointed that out. One of the wealthiest in the area. The Gandhis were well to do, but nowhere in the same league as Kasturba. How do you think she managed to work around the austerities that followed in her later life?
I think it was very early in that transition, that young age, I think, came in handy. At 13, she left her father's home to be with her in-laws. And we must
Mhm.
remember that while financial statuses were, the Kapadias were way above the Gandhis in financial status, in social status, in political status, Karamchand Bapa was above Nanji Kalidas,
Right,
and uh, they were much greater in social status and the political clout that they had. So uh, Makanji. I'm sorry, I took the wrong name. Nandi, no,
Makanji. Yeah, I was.
Makanji.
Yeah,
Makanji.
yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry.
No,
Just
it's okay.
so I think that matched the whole thing, and that at that time, point of time, girls were conditioned to the fact that you marry, and the status, the family, the ability, and everything, you adapt to it. You take it as your own,
Right,
and so she must have been prepared for all that. It must have been a great change, because not only did she come from a very wealthy family, she was the apple of her father's eye, and so he indulged in everything she ever
right,
desired in that short period of time that she lived with him.
right. One of the most jarring features that you have talked about very candidly relates to your grandfather, Manilal Bhai,
Yes,
and how Gandhi forbade him from marrying the love of his life, a woman who happened to be Muslim.
yes,
And you have, in fact, gone to the extent of saying that Mohandas Bhai used the excuse of Kasturba, sort of blackmailed Manilal Bhai into changing his decision.
yeah,
And you also said that he should have said to Bapu that stay the hell out of it. What do
yes.
you think? What do you think happened in that particular situation?
I think my grandfather Manilal was very obedient of his father, and he had a guilt of transgressing his father's authority and causing him hurt in his youth.
Hmm.
The episode in Phoenix with the woman, which had made Bapu fast, and for which Dadaji took a vow of 12 years of celibacy after that. And so there was that guilt that I have caused hurt to my father. And I think that must have played on him, even when Bapu blackmailed him into abandoning the woman he loved. Uh, I think it was a great blunder by Bapu, but I think it was also my grandfather's fault that he didn't stand up for
Yeah,
his right at that point of time. He should have told his father, "Look, I'll obey you in everything else, but you have no say in this matter. I refuse to allow you to have a say in this matter." He
yeah,
should have rightly done that.
right.
Having said that, I can never be displeased with whom he made my grandmother.
True.
I wouldn't want anybody else for my grandmother.
Yeah,
So it's, but I think Bapu knew that if Kasturba found out about it, even if she was disturbed, she would have gravitated to the acceptance that if it is Mani's choice, let him do it. And I
yeah,
will accept the choice, because you must remember that even after Harilal embraced Islam, converted to become a Muslim, where Ba publicly condemned his conversion and criticized him, and the whole thing. After that, towards the end of his life, at every given opportunity, she pleaded with Harilal to come and join them and stay with them and allow them to, wean him away from the complete disgrace that he had made himself. So Ba was much more forgiving.
right,
And
right.
that is where, without telling her, without informing her, Bapu used her to convince
Right.
his father, his son.
Yeah. And since you mentioned both the ladies, why don't you name them? Because they went on to have a very amiable sisterly relationship, like you pointed out.
Yeah, both of
Your
them. My
grandmother and
grandmother
the
Sushila and
okay,
Temi, they both became closest of friends. She remained unmarried all
I
her
see.
life. She lived a spinster, and she used to quite often come and visit my grandparents. And I don't know, maybe it's not the right memory, but I sort of have this faint memory in my mind that when I was with my grandmother in Phoenix. she had visited my grandmother. Nobody else remembers it because they say, oh, she used to come whenever she wanted to, and they were very close friends, and the relationship was very close between the two women and all three of them also.
Yeah,
So they
right.
said, yeah, we never paid. It never became an occasion that we would remember. She was there and she was not there, and she came and she went whenever she wanted.
Yeah. And to conclude, although you are trying to correct the that particular part of Kasturba not having been studied properly, why do you think scholars haven't paid much heed to her role in the making of Mohandas Gandhi?
I think Gandhi was such a awe-inspiring object that everybody was like attracted to him and sort of was and then that continuous identity of Kastur being an illiterate woman of few words who was always there by her husband's side made her, as I said in the beginning of this interview, made her progressively invisible to people.
Right.
Even when I first saw the diary and I read it, and it hit me. But it's a very very simple childlike diary. I'm sure when the book comes out, people are going to say, "Why did you bother to write this?" But that is the only glimpse into that woman in her own words, and that is very important to me because when I started reading it, and when even I told my father about it, he said, "No, no, no, Bad couldn't write. She was completely unlettered." That was his first reaction, and I said, "No, Appa, I'm reading the diary, and nobody else could have written this diary." She said, "Okay, then in that case, she might have dictated it to somebody. Somebody else wrote it." I said, "No, you can actually, in those letters that she has scribbled on those pages, you can see her imprint in that. Nobody else could have been able to write that language the way it is. They would have, if it was dictated, they would have corrected her while writing
Right.
because they wouldn't have been able to resist that. Their training, their education would have overpowered that. For me, it was a struggle. For my editors, it is a struggle. When I
I see.
submitted the manuscript to them, I decided that I would keep the transcribing from Gujarati to Gujarati, what Ba had written into transcribed text. I would continue with the same mistakes she made. ગુજરાતીમાં જે આપણે જોડણીની ભૂલ કહીએ ને વ્યાકરણની ભૂલ ને જોડણીની ભૂલ.
Right.
Ba has written the spoken language, the Kathiawadi spoken language.
Right.
So I decided I'm going to keep it that way. Even when I knew that she has written it wrongly, I said, no, I have to, I am just a scribe. I cannot make a different change in that
Yeah.
language. So I kept it that way. And then when I translated it into English, I was writing very correct English. And I said, if I translate it into correct English and write
It
the
it lo-
Queen's English,
it defeats
it
it.
will
Yeah.
be my writing. It will defeat the purpose. So I wrote pidgin.
Okay.
I wrote grammatically wrong English. And the first time my editor sent it back to me, she had corrected it all. And I pleaded with her. I said, look, this is not Ba's language. She said, but how can, as a publishing house, how can I write, accept this kind of writing? It's our reputation. I said, this is Ba's diary. It is bigger than even your reputation.
Yeah.
And let the readers get, this is the first, maybe the last opportunity for everyone to find out, explore Ba, where she is opening herself up to study. Let's not change that.
Yeah.
Let us make that a principle that we are just the medium. We are presenting Ba to the world for the first time. Richard Attenborough presented Gandhi to the world. He premiered Gandhi to the world.
Right.
My book is the premiere of Kasturba, my Ba.
On that note, Tushar, it's always as it was riveting to talk to you.